Good morning, and welcome to another webinar in the Industrial Heating Equipment Association series on sustainability and decarbonization. My name is Jeff Rafter. I'm a member of the IHEA Board of Directors and the Sustainability Committee Chair. On behalf of the association, thank you all for joining us. We're excited to continue this series on such a critical topic for everyone in the industry. Don't forget to check out the additional webinars IHEA has added to the calendar. Registration is open for all of them currently on the IHEA website. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees are on mute, so if you have any questions along the way, please type them in the questions panel. The speaker will address questions at the end of the webinar. All attendees will also receive a brief survey after the webinar. It'll take only a few moments to reply. We appreciate your feedback as an IHEA continues this critical initiative for the industrial heating processing industry. One last announcement, this webinar is being recorded and will be available in the sustainability area of the IHEA website within the next few days. You'll receive an email once that link is available. Now, I would like to introduce the presenter for today, titled, How to Get Grants to Become Environmentally Sustainable. Micki Vandeloo is the president of Lakeview Consulting Incorporated, a team of 4 experienced grant professionals who have collectively obtained over $100 million in grant funding for nonprofit and for-profit clients in the manufacturing community. Micki presents on manufacturing grants, has been a mentor and a coach, has contributed content for several manufacturing-related publications, and has been interviewed for podcasts and volunteers at local nonprofits. Thank you for being here today, Micki. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and I'm so glad to be here today to talk about one of my favorite subjects, actually, which is manufacturing grants and how grants can fund your sustainability efforts. So let's get started. So a little bit about Lakeview Consulting. Who is Lakeview Consulting? Well, our purpose is to ensure economic prosperity for current and future American workers. And the way we do that is by providing resources to help accelerate growth and innovation for the U.S. manufacturing and technology communities. Our clients are manufacturers, trade associations, and STEM and workforce development organizations, and typically those are the nonprofits associated with a trade association. We are very focused in the manufacturing community, and you'll see why in just a second. So I spent over 25 years in manufacturing, and at various points in my manufacturing career, I intersected with grants. So for a little while, I worked as a manufacturing and process improvement consultant for manufacturers in the state of Illinois, and I would write training grants. And then I got hired by one of my clients and went back into the private sector and wrote grants for that client. And then I wrote grants for the next employer that I worked for. But what I found was something very common with all of my experiences with grants is that when I'd write a grant, and especially when we get a grant, all the time, the leader of the company that I was working with or working for would look at me and say, I can't believe they actually paid for part of this. I can't believe we didn't know that this existed. And that happened so much, I started to realize nobody was really out there talking about grants to manufacturers. So this business was formed from that need. So what we do is we provide grant research and grant writing services to manufacturers and trade associations to help encourage prosperity for the manufacturing sector. Well, how do we do that? Anytime we write a grant, it's for a growth project, for a growth initiative. So it might be exporting, it might be attending a trade show to get exports. It might be hiring people. It might be providing apprenticeships to help upskill people. It might be doing research and development into new sustainability initiatives at your companies. But anytime we do that, it typically results in growth, which results in hiring. I know it's very hard to do so right now, but it results in hiring and growth. And those things that provides new opportunities for America's current and future workforce. So really, we meet our mission anytime we get a grant for a company, and we've gotten some large ones. We've gotten a $3 million grant for a company to add 2 lines during COVID to mitigate supply chain disruption. We've gotten an $8 million grant for a company out in California that was expanding their facility and re-equipping their facility to be able to do very large zero-emission forklifts. And so some of these grants that we've written have been very large. We've also written some pretty small grants. We've gotten $30,000 for a company to do leadership training for its employees nationwide in the state of Alabama. We've gotten $10,000 and $20,000 here and there for training grants, for exporting grants. So helping companies attend trade missions or attend trade shows overseas. So in total, we've gotten well over $100 million for our clients. And all that came from the realization that manufacturers just don't know what's out there and don't know how to access those grants, even if they do know it's out there. We are the only manufacturing-focused grant consultancy in the United States. I know this because we get a lot of referrals from other grant writers who don't do anything with for-profit companies. I also know because we get a lot of referrals from manufacturing trade associations and from manufacturers themselves. And we are really the source for grants for the manufacturing sector in the United States. We have a team of, in addition to me, 4 research and writing professionals. We have a project manager, and we have 2 full-time writers, and we have a researcher that all she does is goes out and looks for new opportunities and tracks those opportunities. So that's our team. We focus, like I said, on pre-award. So pre-grant term, that means before you submit the application, so before the award of the funding. So we do the research into funding opportunities, and we do the writing of the applications. We can also help companies with post-award, which would be the reporting. Once you get a grant award, you have to do reporting. We can help set up the systems to do that, but really our expertise is in the pre-award part of the process. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to talk about what a grant is. We're going to talk about where can manufacturers find grants? What is the grant landscape for manufacturers? How do manufacturers find funding, access funding, and how we can help with this whole process. So let's get into it. So what is a grant? A grant is funding provided to achieve certain outcomes. So what are outcomes? Outcomes are what's going to change as a result of doing a project. So for example, if you're upskilling employees in order to give them better opportunities at your facility, if you are adding equipment or developing more sustainable equipment, the outcome of that is that you're going to be able to offer a more sustainable solution to your customers. Decarbonization, the outcome of decarbonization is obviously better climate outcomes. So the funding that is provided through a grant is provided to achieve those outcomes, to do the activities needed to achieve those outcomes. So it is an agreement between the funder and the recipient. So even on the smallest grants, the training grants, the $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 grants, when you send in an application, you essentially electronically sign that application. And that then is an agreement that you're going to do what you said you were going to do in that application. So it's an agreement between the funder and the recipient. Why is that important? Because anytime you enter into an agreement with the funder, they expect you to do what you said you were going to do in the application. So for example, if you said in the application you were going to train 20 people in 3 different courses, and you ended up training 10 people in 3 different courses, the funder has the ability to prorate your grant award. What I found typically helps with this is if you know you're going to be training less people, not doing the activities, all the activities you said you were going to do, contact the funder. We really encourage that for clients. If you know something's going to change with your project, contact the funder, because many times they'll work with you to either readjust your budget or move money around in a budget. Let's say you're going to train more people, but you're not going to train them on the 3 topics. You're going to train them on 2, so they can help you adjust your budget to still get you the maximum amount of funding. What you need to remember is that funders really do want to give you funding. They are encouraged to get rid of their pots of money. So I've found funders to be extremely helpful when it comes to this. Also, a grant is typically awarded prior to project initiation. So why is that important? So what I tell people is you cannot start a project that you're going to ask for money for a grant for until you get it awarded, until you sign the agreement or get the grant awarded, until you get notification of award. So again, using training as an example, if you're planning a training in December for 10 people, what may happen is that you might submit the grant right now, but then it goes through a review process. Well, that review process can take a month because sometimes funders only meet once a month to review grant applications. You're going to be running right up against that beginning of December training date. So what I tell clients is try to make sure if you're going to apply for funding that your dates are somewhat flexible. We want to have as much runway, what I call runway, as possible, which is the time between the grant submission and the time between approval, because really we have no control over how quickly a funder is going to review your grant application. Grants also range in size. So state grants used to be anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 or $15,000. They typically weren't very large grants, but since the ARPA money came through to the states, since a lot of federal departments have passed through money to the states, now many states have very large programs. For example, Indiana has what's called a manufacturing readiness grant that will provide up to $250,000 for projects, equipment installations that will provide more efficient production. USDA got a big boost through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So they have a REAP program, Rural Energy for America program, which funds energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects in rural areas and also for farms. And those have gotten greatly increased. Now they fund up to half of a renewable energy project up to $1 million. It used to be $250,000. They will fund half of an energy efficiency project up to $500,000, and that used to be $150,000. So as you can see, there's more money out there for manufacturers than there ever has been. If you have manufacturing clients that are doing these types of improvements, it would be good for them to know what is out there. And what I say in this last point is that it is a constantly changing landscape. So my researcher sends me a new opportunity probably about every day. There's a lot of money out there right now, and a lot of it is directed toward workforce development, the manufacturing community. So there's all kinds of new and different grants coming out every single day. So where can manufacturers find grants? So the main source of grant funding for manufacturers is through the state. Why do states offer grants? Well, they offer grants because it's been shown that once a manufacturer gets money to support investment or job creation, once they do that, that brings more money to the state and local coffers. So through increased spending, through increased taxes, through increased withholding taxes at the employer. So the state ends up benefiting greatly from having these manufacturing programs. So again, back to the point that those grants fund various outcomes. So they fund training. We've talked a lot about that, but they also fund equipment installation. They fund innovation. So some states have gotten proof of concept grants. The other way that they're funding innovation at the state level is many states have started to institute their own research and development tax credits. So there has been a federal research and development tax credit for a long time. But now states are actually implementing state research and development tax credits, which will fund like trials and engineering activities and things that are meant to produce new products for clients, or maybe have to support product development. It isn't bench research and development, but it is more engineering time, trials, those types of things. So that's another way states are funding innovation. Recycling. The state of Missouri has a program that funds up to $250,000 to install equipment that will produce product with recycled content. So that's a nice source of funding. And finally, infrastructure. So many states have infrastructure grants or maybe workforce development grants and grants to help you access rail lines more efficiently, improve the roads and the infrastructure around your facility. USDA does fund some of those. That funding goes to the community, but can greatly benefit manufacturers in rural communities. So state grants, where do you find them? You typically look on the state economic development website. So one thing I can tell you is that it's not only not easy to find the state economic development website in your state, it's definitely not easy to find the grants that different states offer. Now, every state is different. California has a really nice portal for their grants, so you can sort by type of activity and the eligibility, whether you're eligible as a business to receive that grant. But on the flip side, we have states like Illinois that make it very hard. They keep information in a lot of different places. There's not one place to find those grants. It is also a very quickly changing landscape. So not only are they not easy to find, but they change all the time. So it really turns into a job for manufacturers to try to stay on top of this. Manufacturers now, and increasingly now, can apply also for federal programs. So one is the pass-through programs. Pass-through means it's federal funding that gets managed at a state or regional level. So one example is the Trade Adjustment and Assistance Center, which is TAC funding. That funding provides funding to mitigate the effects of trade. So what this typically looks like is a company may hire a marketing firm to grow their presence in the United States or even overseas. It might mean that they are doing some expansion. They require engineering assistance to do the expansion. This funding does not fund internal efforts, but it provides up to $75,000 for up to $150,000 projects. So half of the projects, you have 5 years to spend out the money. It's a very little known source of funding for manufacturers and for businesses, but I always encourage clients to see if they can be eligible for this funding. To be eligible, over the last 3 years, you have to have a 5% or more decrease over a 3-month period in both revenues and employment. So for some small companies, a 5% reduction might be one person, and 5% in revenues might not be much at all. So I always tell companies to contact the regional centers. The regional centers do an extensive amount of assistance for companies looking to apply. They help them find out if they're eligible. They manage the grant with them. They help them apply for the grant. So really, this is just a referral that we give to Trade Adjustment and Assistance Centers, but it's a really great source of funding for a lot of manufacturers and for businesses in general. USDA also has a lot of pass-through programs. So again, USDA federally will distribute money to each of the states, and those states, through their USDA state departments, and there are different departments within those state departments, administer this funding, approve and review applications and that type of thing. I mentioned the REAP program, the Rural Energy for America program, before. That is the one that is most common for manufacturers, again, providing renewable energy and energy efficiency upgrades, grants for those. And then also there's the USDA Value-Added Producer Program, which if you are in producing an agricultural product, this provides funding to expand your markets for your products. So for example, there was a creamery in, I believe it was South Dakota, that wanted to do some expansion of their products to butters and different types of sour creams and different types of dairy products. And so they got a grant through the Value-Added Producer Program to actually do the work that they needed to expand into those markets. And then finally, STEP, which is State Trade Export Program. States actually apply for this program through the Small Business Administration. STEP programs fund export activities. So this would be attendance at trade shows, travel, website translation of websites into different languages to address foreign markets. There are certifications. If you need a certification to produce your product overseas, they pay to help you ship your product. These typically are in the range of $10,000 to $20,000 in grant funding, but they can be a real source of assistance for companies that are looking at expanding into overseas markets with their products. And it's a really great program. So like I said before, and I can't say it enough, the grant landscape is always changing. So in addition to the federal pass-through and the state funding sources for manufacturers, the 2021 Made in America Executive Order Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or BIL, generated a lot of grant programs to promote federal priorities. So during COVID, it became very clear that many of America's supply chains were in jeopardy. So there are grants now, not necessarily to support reshoring per se, but to strengthen American production of like batteries and semiconductors, electronic vehicle batteries, electronic vehicles, transition of large vehicles to electric. So anything that strengthens American production of these critical items, there's been funding programs to support that. So one example right now on this topic is NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, has what's called the CHIPS program. And that actually is funding very large amounts for companies to build and to expand their facilities to become part of an American semiconductor supply chain. So this could be the parts that go into the semiconductors, the parts that go into the chips themselves, the semiconductors themselves. So it's funding some very large projects in America. Also, battery recycling. That's something that came out through COVID, that as all these electric vehicles and as many more things are using batteries, we needed ways to better recycle those batteries. So there's a program through the Department of Energy right now that is accepting applications for recycling facilities that do electronics and battery recycling to expand their ability to do electric vehicles, and electric vehicles and other types of large batteries. So speaking of batteries, climate change. This is another thing that came out of these federal funding sources. So these are largely funding electronic vehicle and battery production, and also supply chain development. So I was talking before about transitioning things like school buses and very large vehicles, and for American auto manufacturers to make more electric vehicles and to be able to fund the investment that they have to do those things to make that transition. We have a client that is going to be producing a zero emission transit vehicle, like a shuttle bus type vehicle. And there's a lot of states even that are now using their federal funding to fund things like charging stations and EV battery or EV vehicle production, and support those even at the state level. And finally, addressing the talent skills gap. So everybody knows that it's hard to find people, especially in manufacturing, especially in that middle talent range. So there have been a number of programs that have come out in the last couple of years to support at both the federal and state level, to support apprenticeships, innovative education models, community college credentials. Almost all training grants now require either a credential or a certificate as a result of the training. They love to see a talent pipeline. So a lot of states now are funding development of talent pipelines for certain industries. So this has become a really big topic both at the national and at the state levels. And many states, because they have had this extra money through these federal programs, are implementing apprenticeship departments and apprenticeship programs that are of real benefit to manufacturers. More now than ever before, there is a lot of federal funding, both through pass-through funding and through direct federal investment to manufacturers. That wasn't always the case, and people have gotten very attuned to reshoring, and see that is a direct, benefit to the country. And while I agree, I do believe it's for political reasons, but they don't call them reshoring grants. What you see is you see strengthening of supply chain grants, strengthening America's supply chain. And that is how it's positioned. And I'm sure, again, it's because of positioning and political reasons. You don't want to say you're reshoring, because that might tick off some, international partners that we have. So just remember that this is a very quickly changing landscape. So how do manufacturers access funding? This is a pretty simple 5-step process that we use with a lot of our clients. The first thing we have them do is define their project. So what are they going to do? How are they going to do it? What kind of resources do they need to do it? And what's going to be a basic budget for the project? And once we have all the projects identified at a client, and for manufacturers, this could be a number of different projects. This isn't just one. We go out and we research the funding opportunities. One thing that I can tell you is that when we do the research and we write grants, we don't typically have a project that has one grant that is funding a portion of that project. We look at different things like, are you going to be training people as part of this equipment installation? Are you going to be expanding your facility as part of a new equipment or a new line that you're going to be producing? If so, all those things can be funded using different types of grants. So it isn't typically one project is one grant. It's one project might be 2, 3, 4 grants, depending on what activities are being done. And again, what the outcomes are, what's going to change as a result of doing that project. So we go out and we research the funding opportunities using that project definition. Then we prioritize the funding opportunities with our clients and create a funding plan. So essentially this is, what are we going to go after first? What are we going to go after second, third, so on. Once we create the funding plan, then we apply for funding, we write the applications, and then we update the research for the new opportunities. We do a monthly update of our research in an ongoing contract, and then we go back to that prioritizing and creating the funding plan, because as new opportunities come about, then maybe those take precedence over something we had looked at applying for before. So prioritizing, creating the funding plan, then apply for funding, redo the research, and then loop back around. So it's just a continual process. So how we can help, the ways you can engage us for your sustainability, for any kind of projects that you're looking at. We have 4 different ways you can engage with us. One is for this ongoing and research and writing assistance. One is the standalone writing. So maybe you have found out about a specific grant that you'd like to have written. We're happy to quote the cost to write that grant. We also have what's called a manufacturing grants database. It's $25 a month. It's a subscription database. We update it on a monthly basis. You can sort all the grant opportunities that are on there for manufacturers by state and or federal and by activity. So if you're doing a training project, you can use the grants database to say, I have this training project and I have this, I'm doing it in the state of Alabama. So you can see what kind of training grants are in the state of Alabama. And then we just recently launched a new service, which is a really nice launching point for small and medium-sized companies. It's called the Grant Research and Readiness Service. This service will provide a one-time research, so it allows you to see what's out there right now in the grant landscape for your company, depending on your projects, and then also a grant readiness assessment. So there's portal registrations, there's documents that are needed for all grants, and we give you those gaps. We say, here's where the gaps are in what you need to actually apply for these grants, and we can help with things like portal registration. So the easiest way to reach me is my email, Micki@lakeviewconsulting.net, and then through LinkedIn. It's Lakeview Consulting. Just do a search in LinkedIn, and we can schedule a time to call either through message on LinkedIn, or you can directly email me and we can schedule a time to talk. So I am going to open the floor to any questions.
Okay, Micki, we have a few questions here to start. The first question is, how long does it typically take for you to find grants for a manufacturer?
So our research process takes about 3 to 4 weeks. So we have, when we engage with a client to do research or ongoing service, we ask clients to fill out what's called a research project questionnaire. and that's where they define their projects. And so once we receive that, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to go out and do the research and make sure that the funding opportunities are sound and capture any current funding opportunities that might be out there. So to actually find the opportunities takes about 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay, and on a related note, the second question, also on timing, is how long does it take for the funder to typically make a decision once a grant is submitted?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really depends. But once you submit an application, you are completely dependent on the funder's review cycle. So I'll use this one example. State training grants typically are reviewed either on an ongoing basis or they're reviewed on maybe a monthly basis. So it might be just a month until they make their decision. But some other funders, that recycling grant in Missouri, they have reviews every quarter, I believe. So you might be looking at 3 months to get a decision. So it can be anywhere from the time you engage with us to do research and writing to the time when we actually start writing applications. It can be a couple months. It can be 6 to 8 weeks typically, but it could be, depending on what grant you're going after, to get an actual decision, it might be more like 3 months. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are there any resources you'd recommend if a company wishes to find or write their own grants?
Definitely our manufacturing grant database. It doesn't include our writing services, but it does include all the information you need, including links to the application, funder contact information, a summary of the funding, the amount that the grant will pay for. And that manufacturing grant database would be my biggest suggestion. The other thing is you can Google your state's economic development website and find that and then look in there for the grants. But like I said, it can take a lot of time. The manufacturing grants database just cuts a lot of that time because we have it all summarized for you.
Okay, very good. The next question is, for a startup company, what grants are typically out there to help fund projects and development?
Startups are a little bit tough because I liken funders a lot to banks. A bank will not give you a loan if you don't have any history of paying off loans or don't have any history of managing finances. And funders are a lot the same way. So a startup company is difficult for a lot of funders because they don't have that history. Now, that being said, if you can, for a lot of these federal grants that are supporting, building new facilities, those might be applied for by startup companies, and then they'll need to have a very solid management team and expertise to convince the funder that they have the ability to manage the project and to execute the project. So a lot of that can be done through the grant application, and it's through our expertise in writing that we can help make that grant application very competitive. Also, there are some grants, they're typically for very high technology companies and very risky technology projects. There's SBIR and STTR funding through the federal government that supports what I term bench research and development. It is in a lab, it's typically with an educational partner or somebody that has a lab that can do the research. Many times startup companies in the technology space can apply for these grants, but we don't tend to see a lot of manufacturers that do a lot of these really intensive research type activities. So it's not one that we run into a lot, but that is one that is specifically for startups.
Okay, thank you. As a reminder for the attendees, if you'd like to submit a question, please do so in the questions block on the GoToWebinar app. Okay.
I think that's it for questions.
I think that brings us to the bottom of the webinar. So thank you all for attending the webinar. Remember to visit the IHEA website at www.ihea.org and click the Sustainability tab on the menu bar for more information on sustainability and decarbonization. Please watch for a link to the survey and take a few minutes to share your feedback. We thank everyone very much for attending and have a great day.